Hey, welcome to the Breakthrough Hiring Show. I'm your host, James Mackey. We got Steve Bartel on the show today, founder and CEO of GEM. Steve, welcome back.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. It's always a lot of fun recording with you. I guess just to start us off here, I guess like the last few times you've come on the show, we've really dialed into GEM's product, which is a little unusual. Like with a lot of CEOs I bring on, it's not necessarily so product centric in terms of conversations, but it's just there's a lot going on with GEM right now with the all-in-one product suite that you're developing and rolling out, and how you're incorporating AI and the applicant tracking system functionality. And there's just a lot of cool stuff that you're doing. So we've slowed down on that. I think for today, we can, I'm sure like Jim's going to come up because like you're going to be talking about Jim, we're doing X, Y, and Z. That's going to happen. But I think just talking about how AI is currently being leveraged by recruiters and hiring teams and hiring managers as well. We can talk a little bit about current functionality that recruiting technology companies have incorporated into their products. And then I think we could talk about the future. There's also a pretty big debate in terms of how AI should be leveraged.
Yep.
And I think actually, like when you were texting, there was a couple of core things here. Like we talked about the role of AI in terms of enabling recruitment versus replacing recruiters in certain stages of the interview or hiring process. And then AI's role in terms of evaluation. Should AI just be essentially leveraged to package data and neat summaries and also to help identify gaps or thoroughness in evaluation? Or should
Mm,
AI be accountable for, to some extent, stack ranking or grouping top applicants out from the rest and essentially provide some of the top applicants for whether at like the resume stage or down funnel to essentially shortlist, if you will, applicants or candidates rather for the roles. So yeah, those are just a couple of things that come to mind for me. Are there any other kind of topics or yeah, use cases or anything that are a little bit controversial from your perspective beyond those two?
no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think there's even a third distinction between AI that's just doing like summarization, maybe putting together packets,
Yeah.
versus AI that's ranking and maybe bubbling up the most compelling candidates, versus AI that is actually making hiring decisions and maybe automatically doing so. And so we could talk about the three differences there and maybe where talent acquisition leaders should be a little bit more careful.
Yeah, let's do it. Can we just start talking about AI's role in potentially replacing recruiters in certain parts of the process? Because from my perspective, I don't know. I think there's some inherent bias if you're talking to folks in talent acquisition in terms of AI's ability to potentially replace recruiters at certain interview stages, for instance, or certain parts of the evaluation process. And so I'm wondering, I don't even know where to start. I could throw out a couple recent conversations I've had on the topic to start us off, but I don't know if you've had any recent conversations surrounding this. I guess let me just to provide some clarity, right? You have like interview intelligence platforms like Bright Hire and Pillar, for instance, or just a couple, which are essentially like AI co-pilots that are integrated with your Zoom and essentially think about like Fathom Note Taker, but it's trained for interviewing and it's essentially matching list of requirements and like taking the candidate's answers on the video call that they have with the recruiter, packaging that data to show hiring teams like how essentially folks answered highlights or whatever from the interview, matching the evaluation to see if there's any gaps. Hey, you said you need to know the salary range that they're targeting, but you didn't cover that in the interview, so you got to ask that in the next one. Like stuff like that. It's like packaging
Yep.
data
Yep.
that's staying away from evaluations, but then you have other products that actually are taken as far as stack ranking candidates. We're seeing a little bit more of that top of the funnel, right? Like with resume matching. I see application for that down funnel too. So I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that. It's a lot of I don't know context, right? But that's the whole conversation I was hoping to have with you at least to start.
Yeah, that makes sense. So my perspective is that we're very far away from AI replacing recruiters. I think AI, though, has the potential to really evolve the job, the role of recruiters, whether they're in-house or agency. And I'm actually pretty excited about what that means for recruiters and for the industry, because I think in my mind, AI has the opportunity to automate a lot of busy work that goes into the role of a recruiter and allow everybody to show up more strategically. And you shared a few examples of that. And we don't do this in GEM, but some of the use cases that you talked about around summarizing and transcribing calls so that recruiters don't have to focus on taking meticulous notes the whole way through, and then taking a first pass at putting together a summary of that conversation. Now, that still feels very much like a co-pilot use case where the recruiter's in full control. And I think that's great. And I think all AI, in my perspective, should be thought of as a co-pilot experience. And what that allows recruiters to do is be a lot more present on these calls and not have to be taking furious notes the whole time, and potentially save up a little bit of time with the write-up. But I still think it's really important for recruiters to look at that write-up, to look, especially the summary, and
Yeah.
make sure that it, matches what happened. Because even if the AI is not actually making a hiring decision in that case, it could still influence hiring decisions if it's helping to contribute to a scorecard, for example. And
Yeah.
so
And
I think
that's,
it's super important for recruiters to pay really close attention to that and see it as a time saver, but not necessarily as like the thing that's making the evaluation.
yeah. And I guess like maybe a way to put it is like making the evaluation easier. And there's like a sliding scale. So I'm thinking about it in terms of like not AI making a final decision, but I do think that a lot of the enablement tools, I feel like there could be in some cases more aggressive steps taken than simply just doing co-pilot work. I think like some of the functionality I'm seeing too for interview intelligence platforms is doing some analytics. Like think about like Gong, for instance, right? Like revenue
Yeah,
tool, where it's like the call record, like how much time do you speak during the call, just some different analytics around that. So
yeah,
we're seeing some of that, which like interview effectiveness, right? And providing feedback to the hiring team on doing a better job. Uh,
totally.
I think is pretty cool too. But okay,
Agreed.
so we get to evaluation, right? Like I think the most clear cut, or one, like we could just start top of funnel, maybe work our way down, is resume matching, right? Like for the AI for hiring series on the show, we had the co-founders of a company called Brainer come on. It's actually on the LinkedIn post I tagged you on today, one of the companies, and it's they essentially it's like resume matching, but it was a lot more than I thought it was going to be. It's pretty in depth, but essentially there's certain industries, right? Like just even take like light industrial, which apparently is like CEO of a founder and CEO of a company called Qual, who came on the show, said it's like 50% of job openings or something crazy. Like in the United States, like a lot of companies, a lot of job openings are within that space. Or Brainer focuses on staffing and recruiting. They're doing a high volume hiring where some of these companies will have like thousands of applications, and sometimes there's just not enough time rather to get to all of these potential screens, and so they're using a lot more sophisticated resume matching technologies than we used to have to essentially stack rank or
Yep.
evaluate fit. And it's so in those circumstances a little bit difficult because it's a recruiter might get to the first 50 people, but then they're not even looking at the other profiles. And so you could say, arguably, by having AI evaluate all 1,000 plus or whatever, it is actually giving more access and opportunity to more people to evaluate fit. So I don't know. There's two trains of thoughts here. Like AI should not be doing any kind of stack ranking, or it should just be packaging information, but not essentially floating candidates to the top, right? I don't know if you have any thoughts specifically on this use case, like top of funnel resume matching.
I do. And I think there's also a distinction between top of funnel resume matching and ranking when it comes to inbound applicants versus AI narrowing down the total addressable set of everybody out there to folks you might want to reach out to for sourcing. There's a key distinction there. I'm sure you've thought about it, James, but even the EEOC makes a very clear distinction that once somebody has raised their hand for a specific role, either expressed interest or applied, like they become a candidate. And the way that the law like treats those folks is actually different from passive talent, whether that's folks that you're sourcing net new externally, or even folks like in your CRM or your ATS that maybe applied for a role in the past. If somebody is actively interviewing for an open role or express interest in that open role, companies really need to approach that with a lot more care. and thought, because you definitely don't want to discriminate against folks that are actively interviewing. Now, I think there's a whole range of ways that you can apply AI and different varying degrees to which you need to be careful. On the one hand, if you have AI that is picking out the top candidates and auto rejecting the rest, that starts to get into pretty dangerous territory in my mind, where AI is actually making hiring decisions with no recruiter oversight. If AI is doing its best to rank inbound applicants, I think that starts to trend towards something that's more okay, but it depends on how the AI works. My perspective on this is that the AI needs to do a few things. One, I think it needs to be built on this new wave of generative AI technology that actually allows for better, more ethical algorithms. It used to be that AI algorithms were a black box where it
Right.
was trained on tons of human decisions, which inherently are biased, and you don't know why it does what it does. So, like, unknowingly, you could be deploying AI and creating a bunch of bias. Now, with these new generative AI algorithms from OpenAI, from Anthropic, and others, you can actually give the AI clear, unbiased criteria for what makes for both an ideal candidate, but also the minimum requirements for the role.
Yeah.
Make sure those criteria themselves are unbiased, and then leverage that criteria in the matching and the ranking. But you can also get the explainability of AI explaining exactly why that criteria matched or didn't, and then feed that into making the criteria better. Taking that a step further, you could even reduce bias in the process by asking AI to take a pass on the criteria before it even starts ranking people, and
Right.
give recruiters tips on like where their criteria might actually be unknowingly creating bias in the process. And so I think there's like actually a really ethical way to do this. But my perspective on this is still that AI shouldn't be auto rejecting big swaths of candidates, and that recruiters should still be reviewing candidates and seeing this as more of an efficiency driver, and maybe as a way to respond really quickly to the gems, so to speak, because what we know to be true in recruiting is timing is everything. And if you can bubble the folks up to the top and have a really fast response rate to the folks that are most likely to be a fit based on the clear objective criteria, again, unbiased criteria with the minimum requirements for the role, straight from the job description and or from the hiring manager intake process, that starts to feel more okay to me.
Yeah,
What's
I
your
think
perspective
that's
though?
yeah, I don't think AI should be auto passing on anyone, but I know there's this huge conversation around bias, and there absolutely should be. We need to be very careful here. But I think the way that the AI systems can be trained, even now with generative AI and telling it what to do and what not to do and what information to exclude, I almost feel like it'd be easier to train an AI system than a staff of 5,000 people on some of these unconscious bias issues and whatnot.
Totally.
I don't know. I think it's like the reality is that for a lot of these high volume jobs, the vast majority of applications may not even be looked at if the
Right.
volume is too high. Is that a somewhat accurate assumption in a lot of cases? I think that's pretty accurate.
I think it is. And for Gem, like we're mostly focused on knowledge worker hiring, partnering with a lot of the leading tech companies and large enterprises.
Yeah.
And so I have less insight into high volume, but you're totally right. But even for knowledge worker hiring these days, something wild, I think it's double digit. I think it's north of 20% of our customers have roles with, thousands of applicants, which
Yeah.
you've never seen before. So I think even for knowledge worker hiring, it's starting to happen where folks might interview a big batch of candidates, but then never even get around to evaluating the rest because they've already filled the role.
I think like that the whole issue of people already aren't happy with the process, even pre-AI or without leveraging generative AI. They still, oh, I got this auto reject email, or I got ghosted by this company, or it's applied to 100 companies today, didn't go anywhere. People are afraid of bias. There currently is bias. I think a lot of the issues we're talking about with AI are already issues. So I
Exactly.
don't see it as like a reason not to use it. I see it as a pause. Okay, we have to focus on this. But I think that if leveraged properly, it's like you're actually able to if most qualified candidate is the 900th applicant. like this actually gives, they could actually surface that profile. The other
Right.
interesting one is there was the company called Qual. Their CEO is David Tell, and one of the things he mentioned, he does like a AI voice agent, and the voice agent does like screening calls. Essentially, the AI voice agent does
Oh,
screening
interesting.
calls, and what he was talking about is he does a lot of the blue collar, a lot of like blue collar work and light industrial, very high volume. And he said one of the issues in that industry is that people don't have very good resumes.
Yeah.
So it's like very
Oh,
hard to tell from the resume if it makes sense to set up a conversation with. So by doing this voice AI agent screening, they're actually able to collect a lot more data and they can have literally anybody can do it. And so any applicant could do it. And so they're able to basically surface the candidates that are truly a good fit instead of just going off a resume that they have a very resume base where they have like very low confidence. And which I was like, oh, that's a really interesting use
yeah.
case for AI and how it could actually like, I don't know, I think better serve people to make sure that their skill set is truly seen and put in front of relevant
It is.
opportunities.
It is. And that is super interesting. And I know for, again, we don't focus on this as much for GEM, but for high volume hiring, there's oftentimes just like basic requirements that folks need that might not always be clear from
Yeah.
their background. For example, certain certifications for some industries and being able to have a set of just very basic questions to see if somebody passes the minimum set of requirements. Um, Makes a lot of sense, especially if for whatever reason your ATS doesn't let you do basic knockout questions. So I totally see a use case for that. I also see a use case for AI chatbots for that same use case. Maybe the video is more interesting. Maybe more candidates are more likely to try it. But I think AI chatbots could totally ask some of these very basic questions to understand somebody's background better when their resume is sparse.
What do you think of screening call? Like we could just stick to knowledge, right? Just a lot of our customer base, both of us, right? For SecureVision and Gem, we work with a ton of tech companies, and there's I'm wondering too. It's like screening calls, of course, like at this point are dominantly done by recruiters, right? That's how it's done. But I'm wondering, yeah, to what extent we could start leveraging AI to actually run screening calls. And I'm thinking from a candidate perspective, I don't know, man. I'm hearing from recruiters, okay, people need to be engaged. They want to talk with a person. I'm thinking to myself, like, yeah, but also they have to take time out of their day. They have to do it in between meetings and before, after dinner with the kids and stuff like that. Where if they had the ability to essentially do a screening process on their own time and be able to collect the information that they need to regarding benefits and professional development and these types of things and interact with the system instead of dealing with all the scheduling and everything like that. I think that there's a lot of people out there that would prefer to do that. And I also, again, I see that as a way, like, why not let anybody be very clear with the requirements, but you could let anybody do the screening call, or you could send out the screening call to candidates that the recruiter has reviewed. But I just see a lot of the traditional screening call is completely I honestly, I think it could be. I'm open to being swayed in the other direction with some good data points, but I don't see a ton of value in the majority of screening calls. I see there's that sales element of pulling candidates in, but I also see a lot of inefficiencies in screening calls for both candidates and recruiters, which I think
Yeah.
ultimately are going to outweigh like this like human sales driven approach.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing with screening calls is now it definitely starts to get into that territory of starting to make hiring decisions, at least if it's fully automated. But let's forget for a second whether it's legal. My perspective on that is if a vast majority of folks wouldn't get screening calls anyways, it feels ethical to give everybody a shot, right? And today, there's just so many applicants that recruiters really have to pick and choose who they do a screening call with. And so for the folks that wouldn't get a shot, wouldn't get that initial recruiter screen, giving them the option to do an AI-based screening call, which would only be upside for them, would actually give them a crack at getting a real interview. To me, ethically, that that feels like a good thing, even if there's all this sort of legal gray area that companies need to navigate. And to be clear, like we don't have this in Gem. Like we probably, I don't know, like it might not even be worth us building it because of all of the legal considerations. Actually, did you see this recently that Workday itself is getting sued for providing the algorithm that could be making hiring decisions leveraging AI? This happened just like a month or two ago. Like landmark lawsuit, which is actually going to probably make vendors a lot more careful about
Yeah.
any sort of AI that touches hiring. Did you see that, James?
I'm looking it up now. That's what I'm so yeah, class action lawsuit against Workday. Well, this one says 2023. So I don't know if
Uh,
this was like a maybe there's a further iteration or
it's
like
it,
news.
it's
July,
yeah,
okay.
it's
Okay.
this. I'm pretty sure it's this year, and it's going to court, and it's very interesting because
Oh God, yeah.
previously it was the entire liability was on companies for discrimination or bias in hiring processes. This is the first ever case where it's actually going to court that Workday could be liable for the algorithms they provide. And
Yeah.
so I think actually a lot of vendors that build the software are probably going to be like very cautious about anything that touches hiring decisions in the recruitment process, unless maybe they're like a small startup where they don't have anything to lose because of this case that's happening right now, which actually might stifle innovation. And even if we think it's a good thing for, even if we think it's a good thing to give the longer tail of candidates that wouldn't get a screen, wouldn't give them the opportunity to give them a shot, that could still result in a lawsuit because how does the candidate know if they were in the long tail or not? And how do you actually prove that? And so I think vendors might end up just being a lot more cautious on some of these things that could be good for candidates, but just might be too risky. And so might companies.
Yeah. That's a really good point too. Yeah, I was looking at the Workday. Yeah, it looks yeah. AI powered applicant screening tools discriminate on the bias of race, age, and disability. But yeah, that'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm gonna look into that.
Yeah.
See. Yeah, that is really scary stuff because it could be like discrimination at scale.
First of all, it is scary if that's truly the case, if,
Right.
their algorithm is discriminating at scale. And that's what these laws are here to protect
Hmm.
candidates and applicants from discrimination. Part of me wonders if that was leveraging algorithms that were based on like the old way of doing AI.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, that's interesting. But here's the thing with like with screening though, it's like to me just one step further than having folks fill out forms. It's like when you have an application, you're like attach your resume, provides XYZ information. We're
Right.
already doing this process of looking at a resume and evaluating fit, and then it's like a screening call is plugging in the gaps. And so if a screening call is asking questions, let's just take a salesperson, for instance, like what was your quota? What was your quota attainment? Deal length with transactional, consultative? Was it like 6 months? What was the ARR?
Yep.
Were you doing new business or upsell within existing accounts? I mean, they're like more that kind of they're not necessarily open-ended questions. They're just very pointed screening questions to just check boxes on yes or no. Um, and that's the only information that's being validate. There's, I guess, follow-up questions, right? To that's the benefit of generative AI versus the just a static form, and then of course packaging that information. But yeah, that's essentially what I'm thinking screening, which is I guess probably what you're thinking too. But
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, that seems pretty clear cut to me.
So my read is if AI is helping to understand whether somebody meets the minimum requirements for a role that are
Right.
outlined in the job description and are very clear-cut objective criteria, like, yeah, what was your quota attainment? And that there's clear minimum requirements for the role. I think that's okay, especially if it could help plug in gaps from screening questions that maybe somebody didn't fill out in their application or something like that. Yeah, whether they have a certain certification or like compliance thing that's important for the role as a minimum requirement, like that kind of stuff feels okay to me. I think it's when AI starts to make an assessment on the less objective criteria that we just need to be a
Yeah.
little bit more careful in the same way that recruiters need to be more careful
Yeah,
with
there's
that.
nuance that I don't know why this even stuff like tenure potentially, or I don't know, that's not necessarily like a bias thing, but there's even like nuanced things like that where A lot of people lost their job during COVID due to like layoffs. And so if you see somebody in the tech
Right.
industry who's had 3 1-year stints, and you could train an algorithm to say you want an average tenure of XYZ, then folks who like literally had zero control over being laid off could be essentially, yeah, discriminated against to some extent. I don't know if technically that would be considered discrimination, but there's a lot of that's just an example of something where you don't really maybe think of how somebody could be essentially pushed out of an opportunity.
Yeah, and taking that a step further, there actually is a real chance of discrimination there. If, for example, like women who have children might have briefer stints because they had a kid, and for a lot of reasons, maybe they wouldn't go back after that. And so there actually could be gender discrimination depending on, how AI is thinking about that. No,
That's a
you're
really good
absolutely
point.
right. I think this stuff is really complicated and it's evolving really quickly. But my high level thinking around this stuff, for that reason, I think companies and vendors should be really careful when it comes to any sort of AI in hiring decisions. And even this example of how, like, looking at whether somebody had short stints could inadvertently discriminate against women more than men. You wouldn't even expect that at first
Yeah.
glance. You'd think that's not discriminatory, is like a great reason to tread carefully.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I guess that's like why you see some of the more established players hiring Pillar in the interview intelligence space. It's coming down to enablement, and they're going more the co-pilot
Yes.
route. And then it's like they're doing the data packaging, essentially summaries, identifying gaps in evaluation, which I thought was pretty cool. And then
Right.
they're of course like doing like easier stuff. They're pulling together role requirements, customized interview questions, populating that. Hiring teams can add their own and putting that as part of the evaluation criteria. And then again, like tracking to see what's been covered and what hasn't to ensure consistency and that the different folks are being asked the same questions and all that as well. And then they're integrating with the applicant tracking systems to essentially put together scorecards, which maybe you start to get a little bit into evaluation, but it's reviewed by people, but it's just essentially doing the AI note taking and then putting the summary into a scorecard format. So that's more of the path, but all of the interviews are still being done by recruiters, and it's just sitting in like how we have Fathom and Firefly sitting in on this conversation.
Yep, exactly. And I think that's a good approach, a good thoughtful approach for now. And it's the same approach that we're taking to our applications of AI when it comes to ranking and matching your inbound applicants, ranking and matching and applying that to resurfacing people from your CRM or your ATS for a role, or yeah, ranking and matching at the top of the funnel for external AI sourcing.
Yeah, for sure.
Really thinking about it as a co-pilot approach.
Yeah, it's all really interesting stuff on the AI front. Are there any additional use cases that you've been thinking a lot about recently?
So when I think about AI use cases, it comes down to really what's been enabled by the new generative AI technology
Yeah.
shift in terms of like where we think and focus. And for me, it's anything text-based, which is why like the resume matching and ranking piece is pretty compelling. Because after all, resumes are texts, so are qualifications for a role. And so I think AI can do a really good job of ranking and matching there. And then I also think transcription's gotten a lot better to your point around the interview intelligence and call recording software,
hmm
similar to Gong in the world of sales. And so I think that space is really interesting too. For us at Gem, we've got an ATS and a CRM, and so we're going to be focusing instead of building that on strategic partnerships with some of these new startups that are doing that, like BrightHire and others. But I think that space is super interesting, and I do believe it can drive real value for recruiting teams and save a ton of time when it comes to the note taking. But I also love like what you were calling out in terms of like enablement and coaching recruiters, making sure there's consistency across interviewers, helping companies identify which are their best interviewers, which are the ones that need more enablement. I also think that it could potentially, I don't know if these platforms do this, but if I was them, I would be building in little feedback loops to ask and run feedback that recruiters and hiring managers and hiring teams are writing through a set of like prompts that checks for bias and maybe gives
Yeah.
them some coaching in real time in the moment as they're putting together the feedback about where they could be potentially biased or introducing bias into the hiring process.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's really interesting space, and these products are evolving a lot faster over the past year, which is really cool. And the other, definitely, Steve, an episode to check out is with Nikos, the CEO of Workable.
Cool.
And because they've done essentially a massive overhaul on their product suite, and they're like aggressively implementing AI in each aspect of their business, which was honestly for a larger, more established player. I wasn't for whatever reason going into the call, I wasn't expecting to see that aggressive of a shift from Workable. But yeah, they're like, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this, different stages of the funnel, everything from recruiting to employee management, essentially, more of the HR side of the house.
Cool.
So that was really interesting. It's a pretty cool episode. He drops a lot of cool insights there too.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll definitely check it out. Actually, here's another killer use case of AI that we've been thinking about that we're going to be building into our platform. So we've talked about the ranking and the matching piece. I think it's going to be amazing for the industry if AI can be writing even more hyper-personalized messages and helping recruiters with that draft creation. And here's the killer use case that I think we're really excited about at Jam. So for us, like AI is part of a broader end-to-end platform, and we think there's a lot of
Mhm.
advantages to that. But imagine if somebody's already engaged with your company. Maybe they've attended a recruiting event 9 months ago, or they were talking to James Mackey, like one of the agencies that we partner with 6 months ago about a different role, or that they applied 2 years ago. Maybe they were a silver medalist and that from the rejection reason and the interview notes, all really valuable touch point context in terms of who this person is and your relationship with them. Now, imagine if they're a good fit for a new role that you just opened up. AI helps you surface that person, but it also helps draft a highly personalized first draft to that person, referencing the relationship that you have with them. The fact that I know James was chatting with you about this other role that's really similar to this new role we just opened up, that we really enjoyed getting you to know you as part
Mm.
of the hiring process 18 months ago. We think you would be a really incredible fit for this new role for personalized reason A, B, and C based on your background, maybe even based on the scorecards from back then. And by the way, like we've got another event similar to the one that you attended 9 months ago. Wouldn't that feel amazing to a candidate? And wouldn't that just be a really great thing for candidates and companies alike?
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So is that something you're doing now, or when is Jim gonna be able to do that?
We're going to be able to do that in the next 3 to 6 months. And so we're just super excited about what the future holds. Before we do that, we're heads down on applying the same like AI ranking and matching that we've built for AI sourcing, which is in general availability, to AI ranking for your inbound and also for candidate rediscovery. And that's when I think like this stuff is all going to come together in a really compelling way for our customers and for the market, because then you're going to have the AI ranking and matching technology threaded across all the important channels, whether that's rediscovery, inbound, external sourcing. Plus, you're going to be able to feed in all those touch points and relationship context data, which you can really only do if AI is part of this end-to-end platform that has that complete source of truth for every relationship and touch point. Feed that into the messaging for each of these channels to make it hyper personalized. And by the way, like as a recruiter, you're only going to have to set up like the criteria, the matching criteria once, and then AI is just going to go to work for you across all three places instead of having to configure this in different point solutions. Yeah, we're really excited about how it's all coming together.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I know we're talking about once a quarter here. We should definitely revisit on what you're doing right now and over the next 3 to 6 months as that continues to develop and more lessons learned. And then when you start to, it'll be really cool too when you start to roll it out to customers as well, just to see their feedback and different iterations of the product and how you're of those features and how you're making it better. It's going to be really cool. But yeah, I agree. That's just a totally different level of personalization. And that's also just really cool for Jim because I know like with the product suite play that your team's gone in that direction. It's like all of the systems, all the products essentially working together
Yeah.
to pull even more personalization, probably even smoother than would it still work if they have a different ATS but use Gem for sourcing? Are you still pulling in that data for personalization, or is it essentially if they're just using your CRM and ATS?
Yeah, that's right. I think one of the unique things about Gem is for that specific piece, we're going to make this work whether you use Gem ATS or another ATS. Now, things will work a little bit better together if you use
Right.
Gem for everything. Just like if you use Apple products for everything, the handoffs and the your AirPods just know how to sync a little bit better to your iPhone than maybe an Android and and your
Yeah.
Apple Mac. But yeah, no, I think we are very committed to remaining ATS agnostic and knowing that there's a lot of different ATSs out there, and we want to be able to support customers of all sizes and shapes, regardless of what ATS they use.
So on the ATS side, and I know we got to jump in a minute. I have a hard stop coming up here in a few minutes, but are you now? So I knew you were rolling out the ATS in tiers, right? Starting with SMB, then pushing up market. I think initially.
Yep.
I don't know if that was, tell me if I'm wrong, but how's that going? Are you like, has the ATS like fully rolled out? Are you aggressively selling that product now? Like, where are you in that product life cycle and iterations thereof?
Yeah, so it's going incredibly quickly. We only started building the ATS a year and a month ago. It's wild. And there's so much to build for an ATS, but we already
Yeah,
have,
it's so much
yeah,
to
it's
do it well.
but we already have 100 plus customers using it, and it's now in general availability for companies of up to 500 employees. So we're moving up market incredibly quickly, and we're starting to sign on customers that are in that thousand plus range. Actually, the last 3 months, I personally went and talked to a lot of our biggest, best customers that leverage Gem about becoming design partners. And so we've got this amazing enterprise design partner program where we have commitments from 5 to 10 upper mid-market, smaller enterprise customers, many of them several thousand employees or more, lots of them public companies where we've, of course, gave them a really compelling offer on the ATS piece, but they've all pre-purchased the ATS as part of
Yeah.
a 3-year contract and are working hand in hand with us on bringing it up market, which we're super excited about because, and I can't talk about these companies just yet, but they're some of the most incredible logos in tech.
Oh, that's all.
Top AI companies, amazing either pre-IPO or post-IPO tech companies that anyone would have heard of. Some of the best brands in tech.
Oh, that's amazing. Congrats on that. Yeah, I'm excited to have more of that conversation too next time we record.
Yep, that would be great. Really excited for it as well.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, look, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. We have a lot more episodes coming up for AI for Hiring series. It's going to be great. We've had some incredible guests thus far, and we're going to have even more. And Steve, thanks so much for joining us today. As always, it's a lot of fun, and you dropped a lot of great insight for our audience. So I'm really appreciative of that.
Likewise, great to be here. Thanks, James.
All right, thanks. Bye.